afternoon to you. Brandon Warne here from the Sabermetrics Network, and today I'd like to take a look at the Sports Illustrated underrated list of baseball players. Sports Illustrated recently polled 228 players to see who they thought was the most underrated player in the major leagues. And anytime you poll major league players, you're obviously going to get some interesting results because they're playing baseball every day. They don't really have time to see other players play other than their opponents that are up against them on a daily basis. So you obviously, even in current times where you play your division foes 19 times a year, you're not going to see enough of a sampling to really make good judgments. And so some of the guys on the list, and I'm going to go over the Sports Illustrated players list before I get to my own list. Some of the guys on the list are pretty interesting. So we'll start at the top of the Sports Illustrated list, and then I'll go from the bottom on mine. Michael Young is the top of the list for the Sports Illustrated list, and I think that's preposterous. Obviously, at a time, Young was a very good player, but he's no longer that great of a player, and really just not underrated at all. Howie Kendrick from the Angels is second. I mean, a decent player, but by no means anything extraordinary this year. Much better last year. Paul Konerko comes in third, obviously ageless slugger for the Indians, or rather the White Sox. Shin-Soo Choo comes in fourth. Gerardo Parra, the backup outfielder for the Arizona Diamondbacks, comes in fifth. Nick Markakis is sixth. Ben Zobrist comes in seventh. Alex Gordon of the Kansas City Royals is number 8. Ian Kinsler plays second base for the Rangers, number 9. Miguel Montero, number 10. Martin Prado of the Atlanta Braves is 11. Cliff Pennington, shortstop for the Oakland Athletics, is checking in at 12th, and I think that's a little bit strange considering he hasn't been all that good. And 13th is also a little bit odd, a twin from my neck of the woods, Jamie Carroll, who also hasn't been particularly good this season. Robinson Cano, who doesn't seem to really be underrated in any facet of the game, checks in at 14, and then the final tally for the player vote is Asdrubal Cabrera at 15. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that at 15th, 14th, 13th place or whatever, you don't know how many votes those players got or what the tiebreakers were. I mean, there's a chance that maybe Asdrubal Cabrera got 3 votes. So there's a lot of levity here at play when you look at how many different players had to submit ballots. And 228 players, I mean, how do you divide that up? That's not 10 players per team. That's not 6 players per team. It must be just whoever returned the ballot, I guess. Anyway, so obviously some players on that list that were really good. Obviously some players on that list that can't really get too crazy about. So I've come up with my own list, not in order because it's difficult to put them in order. I kind of have a general listing of the general order in my head, but I would obviously be willing to interpret it differently based on hearing an argument maybe from somebody a little smarter than I am. So I'll start from the bottom of my list, and then I'll go over some honorable mentions as well. So 15th on my list is Adrian Beltre, and when we talk about any Texas Ranger this season, it's really hard for them to be underrated, but Beltre in the past 3 years has accumulated 5.2 WAR per season, and that's obviously considering that this season we're still only in mid-July. So obviously a solid third baseman, one of the best defensive third basemen of this generation, and he's played on a couple of teams that, great teams. The Red Sox were great when he was there, and he had like 7.0 WAR. I mean, just an incredible season. I think in some ways he's still paying for the time he spent in Seattle, where the perception was that he wasn't that good of a player. And he was. He was playing good defense, and obviously Safeco is a deathbed for right-handed hitters. So he's got something like 59.1 career wins above replacement. I think he might be on the Hall of Fame path, and this is a guy that I don't think people talk about like that. So Adrian Beltre comes in number 15. Number 14, I'm going to stay in the infield. I'm going to go with Ben Zobrist. I also think he's underrated, just like they did in the Sports Illustrated list. I think he's becoming a little less underrated as time goes on, as we get a little bit smarter in the mainstream about the things that Zobrist brings to the game. I'm talking about defense and versatility, but being good at multiple positions, contact, but also walks, and things that may not have been quite as valuable 3-4 years ago when Zobrist broke in. Number 13, I have Ryan Dempster, the trade block candidate for the Chicago Cubs. Became a full-time starter 5 years ago. Obviously started at the beginning of his career too, but in those 5 years he has a 3.61 ERA and 8.2 strikeouts per 9. Now, I don't think that Dempster is one of the 20, 25 best starters in the major leagues, maybe not even in the National League, but I don't think he's also mentioned among the elite pitchers in the game, and he's pretty darn good. And obviously this year he gets boosted as a result because he's just having an incredible season right now, and may get himself traded into the thick of a pennant race, which obviously hats off to him. He's in his late 30s, and it'd be good to see him get that run in there. Number 12, I have Chad Billingsley of the Los Angeles Dodgers. Consistent 8.0 strikeouts per 9. Obviously always has his xFIP up there in the high threes, has a 3.73 or 3.74 career ERA. And gets a little overshadowed by Kershaw out there in the West Coast, but he's a darn good pitcher, big fella out there. And he's one of my top 15 underrated players in the game. Going to continue the run on pitchers. I'm going to go with Anibal Sanchez at 11. Anibal's probably my favorite pitcher on that Marlins staff. A staff that hasn't been really supported by what was expected to be a good offense, a good bullpen, good all-around team. And for Sanchez, Ks are a little bit down this year, but you still got a guy that roughly strikes out a guy per inning, keeps the ERA in the threes. He's 17th in WAR over the last 3 seasons for starting pitchers. So top 17 to 20 pitcher over that time frame, and I don't think people really think of him that way. And finally, we'll end the run on pitchers here with Jordan Zimmermann of the Washington Nationals checking in at number 10 for me. Although, again, like I said, these numbers are pretty arbitrary. Zimmermann, in 18 starts this year, has still yet to allow more than 4 earned runs, has an ERA in the 2s. Doing a great job on a pitching staff that, quite frankly, all around has been just terrific. Gio Gonzalez and Steven Strasburg and Ross Dietweiler to a lesser extent, all been terrific in the nation's capital, and that's why they might be the best team in the National League. So moving back into the position players here, we got Jed Lowry checking in at number 9 for me, playing shortstop for the Houston Astros. And about the time that he came on the scene as a trade candidate for the Boston Red Sox in the last offseason when Ben Cherington took over, I wrote something for FanGraphs that I suggested he could be a pretty good pickup for somebody if they were willing to give up something of value, but still be maybe paying less than a 3.0 or 4.0 wins above replacement shortstop would be worth. And it looks like, quite frankly, that's what Lowry is headed toward. Passable defense, really good bat. Obviously the bat plays it short because the glove really doesn't. But the Astros at this point don't really have any other reason not to play him, except I think that he's hurt right now. But rather, it's a guy that you're more than willing to give up Mark Melancon for, and really kind of continue the new school idea that you don't need to keep those relievers on hand. Anyway, moving right along, I got Chris Young of the Arizona Diamondbacks checking in at number 8. Obviously a down year this year, but he's also coming off of 2 straight seasons where he had 4.6 wins above replacement. You got a great defensive center fielder, which you can't really look past either. But like I said, he's a bit down this year, but he's still coming off of 2 big years, just a very good all-around dynamic talent. And I think that he's a bit underrated because obviously he doesn't have the good batting average, and still some people do look at that as far as a big skill for players. So I think Young is one of the more underrated players in the National League and the game as a whole. I got Martin Prado checking in at number 7. He also appeared on the players list. You're looking at a bat that can play in the corners a little bit. He's defensively adept at third, left, right field. Can play the corners and defensively as well. And might be the heir apparent at third if Chipper Jones, when Chipper Jones moves on after this season. Number 6, I got Denard Span of the Twins. Obviously, I had Michael Brantley of the Cleveland Indians in there at 6th, but then the more I looked at Brantley, the less he had of a track record, and so it made me lean towards Span. Span, dynamic defensive center fielder, good on base percentage, good base runner. And basically those 3 things are not always appreciated in their time. I think Span, obviously one of the 5 or so best center fielders in the American League. And just, great leadoff hitter. And I think for that reason alone, he's one of the, 8 or 10 most underrated players in the game. And I think Carson Sestouli agrees. He had a piece maybe about a year ago for FanGraphs where Span's stats kind of showed out to be a little more underrated in the traditional sense. So moving right along, we're going to go back to the National League. I got Neil Walker, second baseman of the Pittsburgh Pirates, checking in at 5th. Been a 3.0 win player this year, which is the exact same mark he put together last year. So obviously if he continues at a reasonable pace, he's going to eclipse that 3.0 mark. You're looking at a guy who's steady at second base, pretty good stick, and his defense is improving, which is good to see. So a lot of positive things going on in Pittsburgh right now, and that's a very winnable division when you think about what all's gone on there this season, especially when the Pirates couldn't hit out of a wet paper bag at the beginning of the season. So I really like Neil Walker at the Keystone there. I think he's a really nice complementary player to what they got going on there with McCutchen and company there. Chase Headley comes in at number 4, San Diego Padres third baseman, maybe on the move eventually as well. A bit of a road warrior in the sense that he hasn't hit that much at Petco, but if we're completely honest, nobody really has. You got a guy that provides great defense at third base, which is a good defensive. It's a spot where you like to value good defense, like we saw with Adrian Beltre. And if Headley gets traded, there's a very good chance I think he could become a superstar if he goes to a more accommodating home park. And it'd be hard to find one less accommodating. I mean, maybe Safeco or Oakland. And I think it's pretty safe to say he's not going to get traded to either of those teams if he goes anyplace. That moves us on to our final 3. I got Michael Bourne of the Atlanta Braves. I think 4 straight 4-win campaigns, and we're in the middle of July right now. He's already over 4 wins. Could be well on his way to 5 or 6 this year. The bat has really picked it up, showing a little more power in his isolated slugging this year. Again, excellent defensive player, good base runner, steals a lot of bases at a good rate, and obviously very underrated. Number 2, I got Miguel Montero, catcher of the Arizona Diamondbacks. In the last 4 years, while Montero has been a starting catcher, his triple slashes looked as follows: 280, 352, 457. So obviously very steady behind the plate, and for good reason the Diamondbacks locked him up. I think he may be overpaid in that sense, but it's not up to us to determine what's overrated in the sense of overpaid. And if you think he's overrated, well, make your own list. Like I like to say, if you don't like my list, make your own. So Montero checks in at number 2. That brings me to number 1. I think if I was ranking players, especially this season, this is who I'd have as my number 1 underrated player. That's Dexter Fowler of the Colorado Rockies. Basically got the same rates for strikeouts and walks, so you can kind of trust what's going on there. But his ISO has just jumped off the map, slugging over 500. He was worth 2.9 wins above replacement last year. He's already at 2.8 right now. Defensively, he's not as strong as you might like. I don't know that anybody is in that outfield, but you're looking at a guy in Dexter Fowler who's become a dynamic player basically overnight, and I don't know if anybody outside of Denver realizes it. So you got my list of 15 there. I'm going to go over a couple of guys that I would have liked to have put in there. I got Johnny Peralta, Ryan Zimmerman, third baseman of the Nationals. With the contract he signed and with how good he's been for how long, I think most people pretty much know how good he is. But I did have Howie Kendrick on my list, Corey Hart from the Brewers, Colby Lewis and Matt Harrison, both of the Texas Rangers. And like I said, Michael Brantley and Shin-Soo Choo of the Indians were guys that just missed my cut. And I'm sure there's more that I didn't even think about that, through my research I may have missed. But anyway, so that's my top 15 list. If you have a top list, we'd love to see it in the YouTube here comment section. And obviously, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you next week.